Ethan pressed his face against the cold window pane, scanning the dark cornfields stretching out beneath a starless sky. The cicada's hum had gone silent, a sign he'd come to recognize. That's when the lights would start. He clutched the radio he'd kept by his bed, trying not to blink.
It's happening again.
Ethan whispered into the walkie-talkie, barely audible.
I'm telling you, the lights are real.
Static crackled on the other end before his friend Jake's bored voice replied.
Ethan, man, give it a rest. You've been at this for weeks. The only thing those lights are is your imagination.
But Ethan knew what he saw. Faint glimmers hovering above the fields like drifting stars, and the silhouette of something, someone, moving between the stalks. He'd tried telling his parents, his teachers, the sheriff. They dismissed it as an overactive imagination, the result of too many late-night movies. But he'd seen them, and he was determined to prove it. Ethan rushed outside, adrenaline pumping as he approached the edge of the cornfield. The lights flickered in the distance, closer now, and he felt a chill race up his spine. He raised his phone, attempting to capture the evidence he so desperately needed. But before he could focus, the lights disappeared, leaving only darkness and the eerie stillness of the night. The next morning at school, Ethan tried again, explaining to his classmates what he'd seen. Laughter rippled through the hallway, and even Jake rolled his eyes.
You've got to stop, Ethan.
Jake muttered.
People are starting to think you're losing it.
By the end of the day, his warnings had become a joke, a ghost story for the kids to tell each other in the dark. Ethan and his aliens, they'd chuckle. That night, driven by frustration, Ethan grabbed his backpack and set out to find proof once and for all. He snuck out past midnight, armed with a flashlight, his phone, and a determination that bordered on desperation. As he reached the fields, the silence was palpable. Not a single insect buzzed or leaf rustled. Then, the lights returned, brighter and closer than ever. Ethan's heart pounded as he aimed his phone, shaking hands fumbling with the record button. A beam of white light shot down from the sky, enveloping him, and within its blinding glare, he saw them. Tall, slender figures, their limbs long and almost insect-like. They didn't walk. They seemed to glide through the field towards him, as if defying gravity itself. This time, it wasn't his imagination. The figures extended their arms towards him, whispering in a language Ethan couldn't comprehend. He stumbled backward, his flashlight flickering in his grip. The beams of light shifted, focusing on the corn like searchlights. But something about the glow seemed to bend reality, the field warping like a heat haze. He wanted to scream, but his voice failed him. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the lights vanished. Ethan's phone screen blinked, but when he reviewed the footage, it was blank. An empty field, no lights, no figures. Just static, and the sound of his panicked breaths. When he tried to explain this to his family the next morning, the response was more ridicule, more condescension. His parents grounded him for sneaking out, and his classmates avoided him altogether. Ethan was the boy who cried aliens. Days passed with no sign of the visitors. Ethan began to doubt his own mind, wondering if he really had imagined it all. But deep down, he felt a presence, something watching, waiting. On the seventh night, Ethan woke to a low hum, like a vibration coursing through the walls. He bolted upright, staring at his door, which seemed to shift and ripple like water. And then the lights returned, brighter and stronger than before. This time, they weren't confined to the fields. They hovered outside every window, enveloping the entire house. Ethan screamed, but his voice was lost in the hum. His parents rushed in, terror in their eyes, as they too saw the lights. The figures stood at the edge of the doorway, their eyes, black as the void, locking onto Ethan's. The creatures moved with impossible speed, seizing his parents before they could react, their bodies going limp like marionettes with cut strings. The creatures reached for Ethan, but he darted away, running into the night, the beams of light chasing him through the cornfields. He made it to the sheriff's house, pounding on the door until his fists bled. But when the sheriff opened it, the town's protector was too stunned to react. Behind Ethan, the lights lingered, the figures emerging from the darkness. The next morning, the entire town woke to an unsettling silence. Ethan's house was empty, his family gone without a trace. People whispered of the boy who cried aliens, but now, no one was laughing. And as the townsfolk gathered in fear, a low hum began to vibrate through the air, growing louder with each passing moment. The sky above the town seemed to warp and ripple, the stars flickering in and out like dying candles. In the center of it all stood the cornfield, and in the distance, faint lights began to glow.